Why Christians used to regard mass baptism, for example by order of the king, as a good thing. Bruce Charlton. The above beautiful pool is at Holystone in Coquetdale, Northumberland, and the legend has it that 3,000 Northumbrians were baptized there by St. Paulinus, died 644 AD, following Edwin their king's conversion to Christianity. However accurate to historical fact, this legend makes it evident that such mass baptism by order of the monarch was regarded as a good thing by Christians of that era. Whereas nowadays such an event would probably be regarded as at best meaningless, a result of coercion, and at worst a kind of blasphemy. Why the difference? My understanding is that back in the 600s, men were much less individuated and alienated, less self-conscious and more group-minded. A good king, such as Edwin, would both love his subjects, and be loved by them, and a real and strong spiritual connection existed between them in a way we might nowadays term telepathic. Therefore, the king knew and felt what was good for his subjects and sought it, within the constraints of his character and circumstances, and his subjects, overall, implicitly granted the king a paternal authority, including over their souls. Such that King Edwin would not have become a Christian unless he knew that this was best for his people, and equally the people trusted the king's judgment, and endorsed it. So when King Edwin became a Christian, this was because his people wanted him to become a Christian, then by that same act King Edwin's people also wanted to become Christians. In the 600s this was simply the nature of that group-mindedness in which people lived, but in 2026 the situation with respect to men's consciousnesses is very different. We no longer experience this real and spontaneous telepathic connection, or, at least, we do not do so above the scale of a loving family. So in 2026 mass baptism of 3,000 people would, almost certainly, be regarded as a consequence of some combination of top-down compulsion with propaganda. Such is just one instance, not a proof, but an illustration, of the difference in man's consciousness across some 1500 years, a difference in the experienced reality of men of the past, and that of men of the present. It is this change that underlies the decline in spiritual authority, hence what used to be, the necessary, and intermediary role of Christian churches, and of all other religious institutions. And indeed, also of all state institutions. Leaders, whether spiritual, such as saints, or temporal, such as monarchs, are no longer in a significant state of reciprocal mental connection with those they rule. What was possible then, is not necessarily possible now. That natural, indeed unavoidable, groupishness of consciousness which was, for example in the early 600s, in Northumbria, both inevitable and, potentially, a cause of good, is no longer our reality. A statue and two temples. William Wildblood. On a hilltop in the Indian state of Karnataka about 100 miles due west of Bangalore there stands a 57-foot-high monolithic statue of a naked man in deep meditation. He stands upright in an almost military posture with half-closed eyes and a slight smile on his lips. Carved from a single white granite boulder, this colossal figure is one of the largest monolithic statues of the ancient world and represents Bahubali, son of the first Tirthankara, enlightened sage, of Jainism who, theoretically, lived millions of years ago in a previous cosmic cycle. How this statue, thought to weigh over 80 tons, was transported to the top of a 480 feet high hill remains a mystery. But taken there it must have been because the type of white granite of which it is formed is not found locally. The statue appears to have suffered no erosion, which is rather remarkable, given that its origins go back at least to the 10th century AD, and some speculate it may be even older. Bahubali's statue. The story goes that Bahubali meditated in a standing position and motionless for a full 12 years until finally reaching enlightenment. The parallels with the Buddha are obvious, and the peace and detachment that emanate from this figure are also Buddha-like. You can see the vine leaves that have grown up around him over the 12-year period. There is also an anthill by his feet which has not disturbed him, so profound is his state of contemplation. A snake slithers by his feet. There is a remarkable poise and self-possession about this figure as of a man who has fully mastered his physical and mental selves, which are now simply vessels for the expression of spiritual realization with no motivating power of their own. They have become the outward manifestation of a spiritual state, and, such is the sculptor's skill, the power of this image can connect us to this state if we approach it in a suitably receptive frame of mind. Jain religion teaches renunciation of the world and the self if one is to reach the condition of inner peace and harmony with the universe. This statue is a perfect representation of that doctrine in stone. For us today it may seem a one-sided approach to spiritual reality because withdrawing into oneness leaves out love of God. Nevertheless, detachment, self-control, mental stillness and the relinquishment of material identification remain all important elements of the spiritual path, and a true love of God must be spiritually coherent, meaning it must know what it purports to love, which it can only do when it begins to acquire these virtues and so see beyond this world. A flight of over 650 steps leads to the summit of the hill on which the statue stands as a symbol of spiritual completion as understood in the ancient East. Pilgrims would have ascended these steps to partake in the spiritual power of the site which, being remote, would have meant a journey much more arduous than the one I took when I visited it in the 1980s, traveling in relative comfort by bus. It is salutary to put oneself in the mindset of these pilgrims of the past to whom the magnificence of temples, cathedrals and statues like this one would have been largely outside their everyday experience, and who would rarely have seen a representation of what they were coming to see before actually seeing it. The impact on them when they finally did arrive must have been tremendous. From Shravanabelagola, the site of this statue, it's a 2-hour bus trip to Bilur and Halabid, two small towns today but once capitals of a royal dynasty. Here are found the Chenakeshava and Hoysaleshwara temples, which are among the most splendidly decorated temples in all of India. They were built in the 12th century AD by the Hoysala kings, but there is something about them which speaks of an even earlier time. The mind that created them with its absorption in the mythological world of gods and goddesses derives from a period in the deep past when what is now myth was perceived as living reality. Our modern rational mind, in which the I has become fully separated from its environment, finds it very different to conceive of the ancestral mind that is merged in the natural world and also extends into the supernatural, not yet fully differentiated from the natural. That is the mind on display here. The Bilur temple is dedicated to a form of Vishnu known as Kesava, and, according to Sanskrit inscriptions on the walls, took 103 years to complete. It contains a profusion of artwork in the form of sculptures, statues, friezes and reliefs depicting deities, musicians and dancers of 12th century India, as well as scenes from the Ramayana, Mahabharata and the Puranas, that popular collection of stories telling tales of avatars, devas and kings from the past. The interior is a multi-pillared hall with dozens of columns, all individual and all carved in extravagant, geometrically complex shapes and styles that have then been polished to give them an almost metallic sheen. The mandapa or pillared hall encloses the garbhagriha, which means womb chamber, and is the heart of the temple where the image of the god is enshrined. Here that image is a 6-foot-high statue of Vijayanaarayan, meaning victorious Vishnu, which features a halo with carvings of his 10 incarnations, from Matsya, a giant fish who saved the first man, Manu, from drowning in a Noah's Ark-type deluge, to Kalki, the final avatar to come, who will appear on a white horse at the end of the Kali Yuga. So maybe not long to wait. Vishnu temples don't usually have the sense of dark mystery that some Shiva temples have, but to my mind there is still something slightly uncanny about them, and even though the worshippers would claim they are paying homage to God when they perform their rituals before the idol, the form and nature of that idol expresses a very different sort of God to that represented by the figure of Christ. Possibly that is cultural bias on my part, but these images are very old and may belong to a previous dispensation of human approach to the divine, one that should perhaps be outgrown. Setting that thought aside for the moment, the outer walls of the temple are as resplendent as the interior. The temple stands on a platform, and there is a wide space around it to allow for circumambulation, which is an intrinsic part of temple worship. As the devotee performed this clockwise pradakshina, as it is called, he would see images of the gods with stories of their exploits from the time when they appeared on earth. The walls are arranged in bands, with the bottom band consisting of elephants, all in different postures. Above them are scenes of dancers, musicians and artisans and other examples of secular life, and then more depictions of events from the Hindu epics. This brief run-through gives the barest hint of the cornucopia of riches to be found on these walls. All human and divine life is here. When I visited, I was with a young Italian I had met on the bus who, unusually, had come to India for sensual rather than spiritual reasons. He was fascinated by how this aspect of life was shown with such enthusiasm on a sacred building, but then Indians have always regarded all aspects of life as valid parts of the whole. The Hoysaleswara temple at Halabid is similar to the Bilur temple, except it is dedicated to Shiva. This similarity only means that the style and conception behind it are the same, for it has a different kind of quality to it. There is a dark element that exists in Shiva worship, due to the archaic nature of this god, who seems to take one back to a primeval time, or even a time before time when darkness was upon the face of the deep. This is why Shiva is represented by the linga, the most basic of shapes that can be conceived of as the first form emerging from formlessness. Vishnu has an almost Apollonian quality about him and is more manageable. He is like a solar deity, whereas Shiva is associated with primal being and the state in which darkness and light are not yet fully separate. He undoubtedly harks back to a pre-Aryan India. In the Vedas he is known as Rudra, who, according to Mircea Eliade, symbolizes all that is chaotic, dangerous and unforeseeable. Things that are part of life and therefore must have a spiritual explanation. Halabid means ruined city and refers to its sacking by Muslim invaders in the 14th century. Many local temples were destroyed, but this one survives. It houses over 20,000 carvings, a truly mind-boggling sum, and the detail displayed on these carvings is equally stupendous, aided by the fact that it is made of soapstone, which is soft when mined, so can be relatively easily worked, but then hardens over time when exposed to the air. Like Bilur, the outer walls here are built up in bands with elephants, symbolizing a stable foundation at the base. This level is followed by one with royal lions and then a band of horses and horsemen before we reach the fourth band, positioned at head height with scenes from the epics and the Puranas. Between these are thinner layers decorated with flowers and designs from nature. There are several more bands with animals, real and mythical, and scenes from court life, and then at the top we encounter the god and goddesses engaged in their legendary activities. Hoysaleswara temple is unusual in that it contains two sanctuaries, one for the king and one for the queen, so masculine and feminine polarities, with each sanctum connected by a corridor and having its own linga and mandapa, and each with an enormous Nandi bull positioned outside facing into the shrine. That to the north is polished to an extraordinary granite-like finish, and both are decorated with garlands and jewelry. The temple is raised on a star-shaped platform several feet high known as a Jagati, and, as at Bilur, there is a wide span for walking round. Inside we again find the polished and lathe-turned pillars, all unique and with wheel and bell designs. It's like a forest of stone with strange geometric patterned trees supporting a ceiling covered in carvings of celestial beings. It's hard to do justice to the astonishing level of artistry and craftsmanship of the Hoysala temples in a short post like this. I visited them over 40 years ago and can still remember a feeling of awe and mystery when I went round, as though something more than human lay behind their construction, something that was at one time present and, though now departed, remained as a kind of echo. Both temples had this quality, but it is the inner sanctum that is the source from whence it arose. The sanctum is like a connection point between this world and the next, and that is especially so in temples dedicated to Shiva. In fact, the meaning behind the Shiva sanctum may go beyond even that. For an explanation we can turn to the German philosopher Friedrich Schelling, whose philosophical investigations into the essence of human freedom from 1809 provides a clue as to what Shiva ultimately is. Schelling wanted to find out how human freedom, which includes potential for evil, is compatible with an all-powerful God. He came up with the idea, probably influenced by Jacob Boehme, that God emerges from the ungrund or unground, a primal abyss of absolute freedom and infinite potential which exists beyond reason and order, and to which these are subsidiary. The unground is pure potency, containing with it both light/order and dark/chaos. Thus, God is light, but there is an element of being, or, as we might call it, pre-being, which, though not evil in itself, contains the potential for evil. God as creator organizes the unground, but he cannot eliminate the dark/chaos element unless he eliminates freedom. It might even be that it is the interaction of dark/chaos with light/order that produces becoming and growth. Order should certainly dominate chaos if there is to be creativity, organization and growth, but it also needs chaos to grow. This is why Shiva can seem unnerving, and an ambiguous god at the best of times. If he represents the unground, then there is potential for good and evil within him, and in that respect he is a metaphysical principle rather than a being. In his philosophical investigations, Schelling asked if creation had a final goal and concluded that it did, because God was not merely being but life. In this sense, Shiva is a god of being but not, I would suggest, of life. The spiritual task, however, is to grow from being into life, so while we should acknowledge the former because it exists, we need to focus our spiritual attention on the latter, and the God of life is Christ. It is important to see the truths in ancient Eastern religion and not dismiss them, for they are truths. But we should also recognize that Christ as a pattern and exemplar is the higher reality and greater truth. The less left, aka, the right, is far worse, spiritually, than the left. Francis Berger. I suppose it's only natural for those with rightist principles to harbor optimism for the so-called right wing of the political spectrum. I have held such optimism myself in the past, but recent experience with such matters has taught me that the whole right-left political divide that is the obsession of so many is a total sham. Moreover, the so-called rightist parties and politicians, conservative types, tend to endorse are far worse than any left and far left party would ever dream of being, worse for the simple reason that the platitudes such so-called rightist parties and politicians spout are far more deceitful, dishonest, and fraudulent than the lies their opponents promulgate. Though all sides of the political spectrum brim with known and proven pathological liars, the liars on the right wing, referred to from here on as the less left, are unfathomably more despicable in their blatant dishonesty and duplicitousness. Case in point, Viktor Orbán, the recently deposed Prime Minister of Hungary, who became a veritable poster boy for right-wing-based types. Although I was impressed by Orbán's response to the migrant crisis in 2015 and subsequently optimistic about his patriotic and apparently pro-Christian rhetoric and talking points, it did not take me too long to understand that Orbán was not really on the right at all. He was something altogether worse, a politician who hijacked rightist principles to hoodwink optimistic rightists into thinking he was on their side while simultaneously undermining them at every turn. For the sake of brevity, I will focus on 3 examples of Orbán's rightist/illiberal shtick: the migrant crisis, a family support scheme that encouraged young couples to have children in exchange for affordable housing, and the Birdemic. Orban was one of the few in the West to openly oppose the mass migration waves that flooded into Europe in 2015. He even went as far as to erect a fence to impede the free flow of largely undocumented migrants from who knows where. The issue became a fixation of Hungarian state television for years afterward. Hungarians were constantly reminded of how the great Orban was defending the nation and Hungarian values from the invading barbarian hordes who were always just a stone's throw away, ready to kidnap Hungary's daughters and steal Hungarians' jobs. At the same time, the state media was notably silent about the busloads of documented guest workers Orban and his crew were recruiting from around the world and funneling into Hungary's many foreign-owned factories, thereby subduing Hungary's already ridiculously low wages and ensuring that global industry would retain a cheap workforce no matter what. When confronted about the matter years after the migrant crisis, Orban merely shrugged and callously stated that he had always been against undocumented, illegal migration. Documented, legal migrants and guest workers were another matter entirely, and necessary to ensure Hungary's competitiveness and productivity. Many displaced Hungarian workers voted with their feet and left the country to seek higher wages elsewhere in Europe. Some moved to the western part of the country to commute to Austria. Very few could afford to stay in the guest worker factories because of wage stagnation or decline. Against this backdrop, Orban lauded the sanctity of the Hungarian family, and how supporting it was the top priority of his administration. He and his cronies quickly crafted a home affordability/childbirth scheme that would reward young couples for having 3 or more children by issuing them non-repayable grants and cheap loans. The ensuing tidal wave of grant and loan creation unleashed an inflationary tsunami that quickly doubled the price of all real estate within a year. Within 5 years, real estate became largely unaffordable, even for those who applied for all the grants and loans the Orban regime continued to offer and expand. I purchased my house for the equivalent of €40,000 in 2015, just before the housing scheme kicked in. My house is now worth about €250,000. Needless to say, the purchasing power of real wages stagnated or even declined during that same period. Talk about supporting Hungarian families. Finally, there is the Birdemic, during which the Orban regime ranked among the most oppressive, fear-mongering regimes in the world. Personal rights, national rights, and citizen rights all went out the window, and more needless money printing ensued. At one point, the administration even entertained mandating PECs for everyone, but eventually backed off the idea when they saw how poorly their conservative comrades in neighboring Austria had fared on that issue. Worst of all, Orban constantly cloaked himself in Christian garb and ceaselessly pontificated about Hungary's Christian heritage, values, and principles. He presented himself as a noble crusader, a veritable warrior saint endlessly defending his besieged nation against the onslaught of leftism, yet he was nothing of the sort. On the contrary, he adhered to the leftist script and agenda on all major issues. Thus, he damaged and looted the country far more than any foaming at the mouth leftist could ever hope to do, and he managed to do it all because there were enough politically optimistic people in Hungary who believed in what he fed them and believed in him as a public figure. Less left politicians like Orban are far worse than their foaming at mouth leftist counterparts, worse because they are more insincere and deceptive. Ironically, the left are actually more honest about their intentions and motivations than Orban, and his less left ilk could ever be. In this sense, I gather that less left types like Orban pose a greater spiritual threat than straight-up leftists, which sheds light on why it is disastrously misguided to harbor any optimism for politics today. Electricity as the medium of techno-spiritual enlightenment. Bruce Charlton. Because spirit is primary, the material, the embodied, that which is perceived by the senses, is a kind of spirit. Incarnation is indeed a developed form of the spirit, which is why the timeline of creation manifested as physical beings, such as ourselves. And why the premortal spirit of Jesus manifested as a mortal incarnated man, and why Jesus resurrected as an eternal incarnated man, rather than returning to the realm of immaterial spirits. The spirit is therefore inescapable, especially when it is being most vehemently denied, because the exclusion of the reality of the spiritual is actually a malign form of spiritual manipulation. The globalist totalitarian overlords are engaged in a spiritual strategy aimed at inducing humans into spiritualizing the material. The mainstream and dominating materialist agenda, vast projects such as AI, climate, biodemic pec-type healthism, the sexual revolution and many others, are sold as material mechanisms for making this world a better place and for saving lives, the environment, even the planet, but this agenda is continually being spiritualized under another name. My class of people, middle-class intelligentsia, the managers, professionals, artists, scientists, educators, lawyers etc., are deeply spiritualized now, believers in a complex and mutually reinforcing ideology that they regard as ethically imperative and factually obvious. Whether such people regard themselves as Christians or members/adherents of any other religion or spirituality, is ever less relevant. The actuality is a spiritual materialism in which approved themes and plans are regarded as spiritually good. Their lives have an obvious public facet of adopting and advocating particular themes relating to carbon climatism, the Fire Nation War, the biodemic pec etc. But my point is that this now goes very deep, and has a primarily spiritual dimension. There is far more to electric vehicles, as an apparently trivial instance, than the matter of subsidized virtue signaling, which has been abundantly critiqued. I mean the, to me, familiar phenomenon of a married couple with 3 cars, 2 internal combustion powered and the other an EV, is being superseded by a couple with a single, large, expensive, EV, whose wide-ranging, and strictly inessential, travel revolves around the location and timing of EV charging points. The more inconvenience suffered, the more spiritual they feel, to the point of ceasing to feel, and therefore denying, the inconvenience. Likewise, complicated and time-consuming rituals of recycling are not merely a pointless waste of time, not just a drag on the economy, nor merely a resource-consuming hypocrisy, nor are they strongly linked to a belief, or even the ideal, of their actions having any effect at all upon the environment. The reality of the problem, climate change, and the effectiveness of their approved answer, has long since ceased to be the point. Just as we saw with the biodemic, when people were indifferent to the actual effect of face coverings on a supposed disease. The masking business rapidly took on a spiritual dimension, in which the ritual humiliation and public abasement became a positive and personal spiritual action, akin to the simultaneous taking of the knee. Electricity has itself become the material manifestation of a spiritual ideal. These material spiritual types love electricity to the point that it is the medium of enlightenment. The colossal electricity consumption of AI centers is felt as a form of spiritual power, analogous to the building of large, expensive temples and cathedrals, good in itself. Even internal combustion engine vehicles have suddenly, in less than 5 years, become primarily and necessarily electrical in operation, such that for the only time in half a century, I cannot get into a car and drive it, but first must laboriously learn to serve the, continually changing, electric computerized demon that has taken it over. Furthermore, that great fetish vehicle, the bicycle, except for weekend leisure/sports activities, has, in the space of a handful of years, been all but replaced by, de facto, electric motorcycles of multiple types, which EVs now use the vast network of cycle tracks, originally advertised as facilitating the replace internal combustion cars and buses. In other words, because IRL bikes almost never substituted for cars, but in practice replaced walking or were used by hobbyists. In practice now electricity-powered bikes have replaced leg-powered vehicles, or are used as motorbikes but with additional access to footpaths and cycle lanes. Yet, in the eyes of their class advocates, electricity-consuming bikes retain the spiritual mantle of the intrinsically good bicyclist. This is the tip of a very large iceberg that is sweeping through Western civilization, which is itself becoming Western civilization, not merely in practice, but as a spiritual goal. It is inside people's head, it is in their thoughts, it is the subject of their daydreams. Something is afoot that is larger than the conventional modes of analysis and explanation. I feel that I am dwelling in a far less human, far more alien and abstract world than anything experienced in human history thus far. For them, for its millions of enthusiastic and fanatical adherents, this is all of a piece, and none of the institutions, none of the churches, have even begun to understand, let alone resist, what is going on. On the contrary, they are all a part of it, even or especially when they pick on some tiny aspect for discussion or even resistance. More than ever, those who desire the salvation of Jesus Christ need to be not of the world, even though we cannot escape living in the world. Which entails seeing the world as it is, that its very materialism is spiritual. That we ourselves and our neighbors are complicit, and some of them are not just consenting, nor merely willingly complicit, but are deeply affirming of an alien, unbiological, anti-life techno-spirituality. It entails understanding that the spirituality of this world has already become inhuman/anti-human, and anti-Christian to an unprecedented degree, and in the most profound way. You don't need to find and marry a girl but a particular person, the false aim of the generic instead of the particular. Bruce Charlton. I see a very general problem, that is of people seeking generic experience, rather than particular and specific experience. Consider the vast edifice of advice and aspiration for men concerning marriage, the question of the how to get a girl type, including all that manosphere stuff. The problem is in the generic a girl, and that problem is not solved by narrowing the search to a particular subtype of woman. The problem is that people are encouraged to seek a type, not a person. And the problem is not that such advice does not work, the problem is that so many people actually agree with the quest for a category, internalize it, believe it, defend it. The problem is when this kind of thinking leads to people getting what they want. If you want a girl, the deepest problem is that you may get exactly that, a relationship with someone who is regarded as a member of a generic category. The problem is that, like the arranged marriage of a monarch, you, as member of the category king, will marry a representative of the generic category of young beautiful princesses, rather than any specific and actual human being. And the worst is when you are so shallow or corrupted as to be satisfied that this is indeed the ideal of your life. Of course, there is some truth in some generic categorizations, and it may be that marrying a woman of a certain category is better than not being married. But that is a lesser of evils argument, which can be used to justify anything, even voting in elections, not the basis of your life quest. A girl is not what is needed, a girl, not even a particular subcategory of woman, tailored to your personal preference, will not and cannot satisfy our profound and inescapable spiritual aspirations and hopes and needs. What is needed for marriage, and what ought therefore to be aimed at, is not a girl but the girl, a particular person. Now, this idea of the one, or the soulmate has been much abused and is often ridiculed, often rightly so. Because like all the highest of human aspirations, including the search for God, it may be corrupted into an excuse for selfishness, hedonism, spite, status-seeking, money-seeking, cowardice, or any other of the sins to which men are prone. Yet, When all has been said, and rightly said, in this world, if we do not seek the right goal, if we do not rightly direct our intentions and efforts, we are very unlikely to attain what we most deeply need, or anything like that, given our own weaknesses, and this world of so many and such adverse possibilities. My point is that what we most need, and rightly need, as individual and unique human beings in this mortal life, is specific and typically unique, not generic. This applies to many things, generically, one might say. For instance, we don't need a religion, such as King Chaz III has so often recommended. Different religions offer very different things. If we want what Jesus offers us, resurrected eternal life in heaven, then we need Christianity, we need to follow Jesus. Or if, as Christians, we desire direct spiritual experience, then we ought not to seek this generically. For instance, it is a mistake to seek to speak with angels, because angels are a category. The proper aim is to have an experience of an angel, but a relationship with some particular spirit being. And, as such, as with human beings, from a motive rooted in love of that being. Not in order to get something from an angel, such as help or advice. And the same with saints, who I take to be resurrected men. This is one aspect of the reality that creation is rooted in love, and love is, contrary to so many common and false conceptualizations, between particular beings, and our highest and deepest life as loving, and creating, beings is about actual, particular other persons. Any good and real marriage that fulfills our deepest yearnings and is a fundamental basis for our mortal life will be unique, as a fact, rooted in an unique and loving relationship, between two absolutely specific human beings. The more generic the marriage, the more it conforms to an institution relating to categories of persons, the less it will satisfy our fundamental needs and hopes. Because when we regard ourselves as primarily members of a category, and seek for a relationship with another person on the basis of their categorical membership, then we have certainly subordinated the status of love in our life, and we may have excluded love altogether. So, we should be careful what we want and seek for. When we need something specific, we err if we seek something generic. Especially because we may then get what we want, get that and nothing more. Choosing our ultimate choices, the necessity goes all the way down. Bruce Charlton. The world provides choices. We must choose, and we can personally choose, or else we can accept external, societal, institutional choices. That is to say, some things we choose to accept, others we choose to make a personal choice. Therefore, we choose what to choose. In some cases our situation provides a menu of choices, and the expectation, or instance, that, in our personal choosing, we choose from the menu. But we may choose not to choose from the menu. Because it may be that we choose to assume that the menu provided by society does not include all the possible or best options. In sometimes we choose to choose from the menu of choices, but other times we choose our choices. If we decide to choose from the menu, then we have already chosen to immerse ourselves into society as it actually is. This is important, choose only from the menu, and you are in effect endorsing society. When you choose from the menu, you are implicitly endorsing the values of those who have provided the menu. The question arises, can we, should we, choose to go out with the menu of choices? This model of choosing applies to Christianity, but the fundamental way in which we conceptualize and understand Jesus. It applies to the choice of denominations and churches, their doctrines and authority, it applies to dealing with differences and disagreements within churches, it applies to choosing how we read the Bible. Always, there is choosing of choices, always the choosing of choices goes all the way down. Everything always changes, and yet everything stays the same. Bruce Charlton. Is it true that everything changes, and yet everything stays the same? It does seem to have a general truth, especially over the long term, and in one direction, when the first everything is taken to mean the superficial aspects of daily life and things, which are always changing, but the second everything means the fundamental and overall goodness of daily life. For instance, the design of an entity, whether a car or a constitution, fashions or laws, tends frequently and always to be changing, especially in this age of left totalitarian bureaucracy, and these changes can be sold as improvements. However, these changes do not add up, they fail to lead to any fundamental improvement in things in general. For example, the totalitarian society of left totalitarian bureaucracy continues, and indeed solidifies. What I mean by one direction, is that while it is common and easy for surface changes to make life overall and in the long term worse, this seldom works in the inverse. It seems difficult and rare for a multitude of superficialities to improve life in a lasting and qualitative fashion. This is related to the observation that while it is relatively quick, easy and cheap to corrupt people and make them worse, it happens all the time, and I have seen this qualitative corruption of people more often than not over the past decades, for example in relation to my class of people in medicine, science and academia. On the other side, it is so slow, difficult, and costly of effort to improve people, that I think it fair to say that there is no known method by which it can be done. To put it differently, people can be made worse passively and unconsciously, simply by their going along with the changes of life, passively responding to the incentives towards evil. But for people to improve, to become better people, requires an inner, active and conscious change in their attitudes and motivations. Since getting worse is unconscious and passive and energy absorbing, while getting better is conscious and active and energy consuming, getting worse naturally happens more often and more widely. This, I think, is a reason why well-meaning people so often err in their optimism. After considerable investment of times and effort, they have been able to reform some evil or injustice, or to introduce some improvement, and the tendency is to regard all such positive steps as accumulating towards a hope for positive and general transformation. For instance, institutions, including churches, may have achieved many little but surface improvements, in some objectively measurable area, such fundraising, attendance, missionary/evangelical activity, implementation of one or another scheme. And these several or many surface changes are mistakenly summated into the optimistic expectation that things are going their way. The model they believe is that any step in the right direction is of positive value, and so long as there are such steps, then things are optimistic. But, after a while, a step back and an objective eye reveals that although everything changes in the desired directions over the short-medium term, over the medium-long term, fundamental decline continues. Christian apostasy continues, churches continue to shrink in seriousness and size, faith is rarer and weaker, assimilation to the values of secular left totalitarianism is increasingly dominant. However, such is our addiction to institutional optimism, that an objective retrospect seldom happens, and lessons are never learned. Instead, over and again, some novel strategy is embraced, some new set of optimistic initiatives becomes the center of attention and efforts, and some of these are achieved with superficial success. And the cycle repeats. This is how it is with the world, and apparently how it always has been. Even when, perhaps stimulated by a religious revival, or a good monarch, there is a genuine positive transformation at the large scale. This cannot be made into a system, and the attempt to so reveals flaws in the original basis for positive change, such that new kinds of corruption emerge, and the benefits are soon dissipated, then overwhelmed. Everything changes, yet everything stays the same. This is why Jesus Christ did not promise a better world, and did not construct a system for attaining a better world. He knew that such is impossible in this mortal life, by the very nature of this world. But instead Jesus promised something genuinely attainable, thanks to his work, that individual people might, after death, have resurrected eternal life in heaven. My current favorite symphony. William Wildblood. I suppose Mozart is the greater composer, but I often prefer Haydn. There is an innate goodness about his music, and it appears there was about him too. Portraits show a kind-looking man, and reports about his life confirm this impression. He was widely regarded as a good and honorable person, and noted for his particular modesty, generosity and warm heart. He was a humble man with deep faith in God, to whom he attributed his artistic success. All in all, a completely admirable person, very unusual for a great artist. I have recently worked my way through his entire symphonic oeuvre, 104 official ones plus a couple of late discoveries, and there is not a dud among them. Some are obviously better than others, and the later works certainly show development. Quite unlike pop musicians who have usually done their best work by 25, Haydn carried on improving and was composing some of his greatest works at the end of his long life. But there are pieces of genius throughout the canon. I particularly love the last movement of the 29th Symphony, a joyous presto rush to the line which is at 12.33 here, but there are countless other examples one could give. The middle period Sturm and Drang symphonies are very fine, with their early hints at a romantic sensibility expressed through the subtle use of counterpoint and dramatic contrasts. English readers of a certain age will know the Ladybird books, short hardback books for children of about 50 pages which introduced their youthful audience to a variety of subjects from fairy tales to British history and wildlife. I remember as a small child being entranced by the Ladybird books of spring, summer, autumn, and winter, all beautifully illustrated. There was also a Ladybird book of classical composers, and that may have been where I first heard of Haydn. It's certainly where I first heard of classical music. I remember reading that the experienced listener could even tell the difference between Bach, Mozart and Beethoven, which seemed incredible to me then. This was when I was very young. Some years later, when I began to explore classical music, I remembered this book and bought LPs of some of the recommended works, such as Bach's Brandenburg concertos, Mozart piano concertos and Beethoven symphonies and piano sonatas. I also bought Haydn's Surprise Symphony in a performance by Herbert von Karajan, which would probably seem very heavy-handed to me now. But then I enjoyed it immensely. It is deceptively simple, incredibly tuneful, and the perfect piece for a classical newcomer. It's a pointless exercise, playing the game of favorites, because there are so many possibilities and one's tastes change. I would certainly not say that the Surprise Symphony is better than Beethoven's Pastoral or Mozart's Jupiter or Dvorak's New World, just to mention symphonies with names, but at the moment it is the one I am enjoying the most. The Andante second movement is the famous one with the surprise, which I won't describe in case you haven't heard it, but all four movements are wonderful with a fleet-footed joy to them. Elitists may turn their noses up at what Charles Ives called nice little easy sugarplum sounds, but that's their bad luck. Haydn doesn't plumb the depths of a Beethoven or Wagner, that was not his era, and some may mistake his fluency for a facile shallowness. However, his music breathes sheer natural goodness, and that is sometimes the best thing to experience. Hungary's political top-down Christianity project was a travesty. Top-down church projects offer no re-Christianizing solution. Francis Berger. The following includes some meandering commentary on Ibn Thran's article Will Hungary be a Christian Nation after Orban, which appeared on the First Things site yesterday. Those wishing for a succinct encapsulation of my views regarding the article may be satisfied by the summary below. Thran correctly recognizes the ineffectiveness and inanity of Christianity as a top-down state project but misguidedly promotes a top-down church project as the means through which to re-Christianize people in the West. Although I agree with Thran's dismissal of politics as a re-Christianizing force, I vehemently reject his claim that churches offer any solution to the re-Christianizing problem, primarily because churches differ little from political parties in their approaches, methods, aims, and motivations, to say nothing of the spiritual collapse churches demonstrated in 2020 to 2021. Re-Christianizing today depends entirely on the aims, motivations, and faith of the individual Christian sans all Christian externalities, even those provided by the most well-meaning church. A Christian today must learn how to become and remain a Christian in what amounts to this worldly void. He cannot rely on anything external to guide him or save him. Christianity must become predominantly internal, mystical, and spiritual. And that's where the adventure starts. Anyway, on to the article, in italics, some editing added.
As a Dane from one of the world's most secular societies, I had come to Hungary expecting a kind of Christian Canaan, a place where a government unapologetically championed the faith, defended Christian values in the EU, and stood as the last real bastion against aggressive secularization. Here, I imagined, the streets of Budapest would overflow with vibrant Christian life.
They did not. The explanation for this is quite simple. Orban's rhetoric about a Christian Hungary was just that, rhetoric. Strip that rhetoric away, and you are left with a country that is just as secular as Denmark or perhaps even worse. Yes, the Hungarians may be a little more socially conservative in their values, but social conservatism does not in itself imply Christian belief. For years, Christians and conservatives touted Hungary as an exemplary Christian nation when it was and remains anything but. They took Orban's rhetoric at face value and embraced that as reality when the actual cultural and religious situation in Hungary revealed a different reality entirely. As much as Christians love to expound the veritable existence of the opposite, the stark reality of our modern world is that there are no Christian nations left in the West. Not even culturally Christian ones. Not one. Although some externals and going through the motions still linger in Western countries, it would be egregiously insincere to argue that any country in the West is Christian, culturally or otherwise. Hungary proves this beyond the reach of any counter-argument. If there were countries in the West that had a feasible shot at becoming culturally Christian, it was the former Eastern Bloc countries. However, once they emerged from behind the Iron Curtain, the cultures within these nations unequivocally welcomed Western secularism.
In 10 months of daily life in Budapest, I saw remarkably few signs of living Christian faith. I regularly went to Mass in several Catholic churches, and they were decently full on Sundays, yet overall participation remained strikingly low. The statistics confirm this. Hungary has one of Europe's lowest rates of regular church attendance. Only about 12 to 17% of the population attends religious services at least monthly, and among young adults, the figure drops below 10%. While most Hungarians still identify culturally as Christian, predominantly Roman Catholic or Reformed, the country is functionally highly secularized, with a large share claiming no active religious affiliation.
As accurate and interesting as all of this is, I am convinced that it represents an extremely narrow and misguided view of what living the Christian faith must entail today. Note the focus on groups and percentages within groups. Note the spotlight on Christian externalities, specifically, church attendance and professed church affiliation. As is the case with virtually all self-professed Christians, the author of this excerpted article regards Christianity as primarily external, cultural, social, and political. It's all about how many people claim to belong to a particular church or regularly go to church, which then often segues into which political parties officially oppose the secular left by championing Christian ideals and values.
Yet on St. Stephen's Day each year, one could easily be tempted to believe that Hungary was filled with fervent Christians. Hungarians flocked to the national celebrations. They cheered and took photos as drones lit up the night sky with the glowing image of the Christian king's crown above the Danube. But when the lights went out, Hungary was no more Christian than before.
The paragraph above helps reinforce an earlier post of mine in which I commented on the utter vacuity of the annual drone cross display. Rod Dreher would disagree. Moreover, it also presents a realistic and unintentionally damning report on the state of nationalism in Hungary. St. Stephen founded the nation over 1,000 years ago, yet when the drone display ended, Hungary did not become more Christian or more nationalistic. If anything, I believe the author's observation lays bare how utterly pointless and potentially harmful any external show of Christianity has become in our post-Christian world, harmful because it obstructs people from looking elsewhere for the essence of Christianity.
Orbán himself was fully aware of this disconnect, yet he continued to believe strongly in the importance of cultural Christianity. He repeatedly stressed that Christian virtues lead to peace and happiness, and the Hungarian constitution explicitly obliges the state to protect Hungary's constitutional self-identity and Christian culture. He saw the preservation of this Christian cultural framework as absolutely essential. That is why he fiercely opposed same-sex marriage and the broader LGBTQ agenda. In his eyes, accepting it would mean that Christianity no longer functioned as the moral code for Hungarian and European culture. Once that foundation was abandoned, culture would break loose from its Christian roots and slide into a post-Christian void.
Orbán may have fiercely opposed same-sex marriage and the alphabet agenda in his rhetoric, but that did nothing to prevent one of his most loyal MEPs from attending an all-male sex orgy in Brussels during the pandemic lockdown. It also did not hinder the annual gay pride parades, which went on regardless of Orbán's fiery opposition and legal prohibitions. That aside, Orbán did not care about cultural Christianity at all. Sure, he went on about ad nauseum. However, a closer look at his policies reveals that he was following the secular, leftist playbook for all Western countries in the areas it mattered most, more particularly, indebting and impoverishing Hungary and Hungarians to levels rarely seen before, all while enriching himself and his gay orgy-loving cronies to the tune of billions. It's well past time that Christians wake up to the fact that all Western countries are already in a post-Christian void. Christianity no longer offers any cultural framework nor functions at a moral level anywhere in the West. Ironically, those who blather on about the need for such frameworks and morals rank among the worst offenders and betrayers of the Christian roots they profess to defend.
Orbán's government therefore offered concrete incentives rooted in Christian anthropology as part of one of Orbán's flagship policies, strengthening the traditional family. For example, mothers with 3 or more children receive a full lifetime exemption from personal income tax. Yet even after the policy was expanded in late 2025, few women actually took advantage of it.
What good is a lifetime income tax exemption if your net income is roughly €15,000 a year? Yes, the average Hungarian, male or female, earns about $15,000 annually after taxes. If Orbán had wanted to root his incentives in Christian anthropology, he could have considered raising wages instead. However, all of this once again misses the point entirely. Tax incentives. Pay. Is that what Christianity and Christian values are all about?
This, it seems to me, is the deeper lesson. Orbán's project was not without merit. After 40 years of communist destruction, Hungarians understandably craved a recovered national identity, a moral code for what is right and what is wrong. Yet when the defense of Christian culture becomes primarily a top-down state project, it risks turning into identity politics wearing a cross. Cultural Christianity, a thin veneer of heritage, symbolism, and national pride, lacks the power to re-Christianize a people. It cannot substitute for the Church's own work of preaching, sacraments, discipleship, and conversion.
Yes on the first part, no on the second. Politics cannot and will not re-Christianize people, however, contrary to the author's claim, neither will churches. Christianity as a top-down church project will fail. Or, more accurately, will fail again. Placing faith in churches as a re-Christianizing force is just as misplaced as thinking politicians can create Christian nations. Though potentially useful for some, preaching, sacraments, discipleship, and conversion all concentrate on the externalities of Christianity, and are insufficient for the sort of Christian faith required today.
Hungary shows that a government can champion Christian values in law and rhetoric while the population remains largely unmoved in heart and habit. When Fidesz lost the election, practical concerns proved far more decisive for many voters: struggling healthcare, a weak economy, and corruption scandals. The Christian identity Orbán had championed simply did not run deep enough to keep them loyal. The Christian symbols had not reshaped souls, they had mostly rallied a cultural tribe.
Put another way, Hungarians finally saw through Orbán's Christian-themed bullshit. Orbán may have championed Christian values in law and rhetoric, but that law and rhetoric did not apply to him and his cronies. Moreover, it did not apply to the average Hungarian who is and always was far more concerned about the economy and other assorted this worldly concerns than he ever was or is about what Christianity is or should be. Also, the whole cultural tribe thing is waning in Hungary. Most of the Hungarians I meet, particularly the young, want to leave Hungary and escape Hungarians. Anyway, as Thrun notes, the Christian symbols had not reshaped souls. Taken a step further, I would argue that is not necessarily a bad thing. I am firmly convinced that we live in times during which no Christian should rely on any symbol to shape his soul. His Christianity should and must extend deeper than that.
Hungary will only become a genuinely Christian nation when the churches take up the task that was always theirs. With the state no longer wrapping itself in the mantle of Christian nationalism, the gospel may finally speak with the clarity and freedom it needs, untangled from political power and uncompromised by the compromises of governance. A Christianity that depends on Orbán, or any Caesar, for its survival was never going to endure. A Christianity that rises again through preaching, prayer, and sacrificial witness just might.
The same goes for a Christianity that depends on churches for its survival. Relying on preaching, prayer, and sacrificial witness in a church alone does not cut it anymore. More is needed. That more is internal faith anchored in freedom and creativity, which implies less dependence on externalities like churches and symbols.
Nations are not Christian because their constitution says so or because their leaders wield a cross. People become Christian when their hearts are claimed by Christ, something no government, however well-intentioned, can accomplish in their place. The real work begins now.
Yes, but the church will not assume that real work in any meaningful way. Anyone who thinks otherwise is delusional. People do become Christians when Christ claims their hearts, but such heart claims can no longer depend on churches to instill them. The real work the author pines for must happen through inner, mystical, spiritual experience. The nation Christians yearn for is not of this world. No this worldly force or organization, be it a nation, political party, or church, can deliver it for them. Elite survivalism. Bruce Charlton. I have written before about the corrupting spiritual vortex that is prepper survivalism, where low-level people, such as you and me, engage in preparing to survive catastrophes, to become the nucleus and leadership of future human civilization. Or something. I have also discussed elite survivalism, of the super preppers and the mega-rich multi-billionaire class, who openly discuss vastly expensive schemes of many kinds to ensure their own survival of some kind of civilizational or planetary collapse. while mocking and excluding as conspiracy theorists anyone who actually joins the dots to notice what they are doing. Why does the collapse and dystopia scenario have such a fascination for modern people, and over so many decades? Why do people so much enjoy reading and viewing such fictions? I think one answer is that it is mostly a yearning for simplification of life and reversion to an imagined earlier stage of consciousness. The notion seems to be that a collapse into dystopia will strip away all our first world problems, anxieties and scruples, by an enforced focus of attention on immediate survival. And that this survival imperative will also simplify morality, so that we can become completely selfish and pleasure-seeking, with what seems like the perfect excuse that we had no alternative. Survivalism also carries the double incentive of indulging our spiteful natures. This shows through the survivalist fantasies, peeping through the screen of rationalizations, I mean the pleasure taken in the imagined miseries, suffering and death of other people, while simultaneously blaming them for their situation and congratulating ourselves for our superiority in avoiding it. The fantasy is of the survivalist looking down upon the desperate situation of the masses, or perhaps the destruction of Earth itself, with a combination of noble regret and smugness, while fortified by the conviction of having been chosen for the responsibility to continue the legacy of the human race. Oh yes, the spitefulness behind all this stuff is very evident. The bizarre incoherence of mainstream modern life is such that this desperate personal survivalism at any price alternates with a cultural obsession with euthanasia, painless annihilation on demand. I regard this as evidence of demonic capture, that people have, willingly, surrendered their fundamental life aims to purposively evil spirits, who are sadistically playing with human souls, and enjoying their power to seduce and manipulate human aspirations and behavior. Just as the elite survivalists enjoy their ability to manipulate public opinions and behaviors in all kinds of self-destructive but contradictory ways, to manufacture a delusional bubble and induce the masses to choose to inhabit it, so, in their turn, these credulous and foolish elites are themselves being manipulated by demonic lies. The elite survivalists are plotting to destroy a doomed world and most of its useless people, or sometimes planning to escape from a possible or impending catastrophic natural disaster, but in practice all this survivalism will amount to wrecking the world in order to build their own spiritual prisons, soul torture chambers, and self-execution rooms. Such is modern mankind sans God and Jesus, excluding the soul and spirits, when the highest ideology is utilitarian altruistic hedonism, in this world. When human life is bounded by birth and death, and is about nothing more than our state of happiness, and official ethics are merely justified by supposedly enhancing alleged happiness. We have committed ourselves to metaphysical assumptions that have left people with nothing but the hope of optimizing their current state of pleasure, minimizing their risks of suffering. Then we have refused to acknowledge this is what we have done. We made ourselves a jail, walked into it, and then forgot we built it, blinded ourselves to the open doors, and cried that we cannot possibly escape. And the outcome is that we are wide open, credulous, and willing to embrace our own destructive manipulation by those who are more selfish and powerful than ourselves, whether these others are incarnated humans, or demonic spirits. Fantasies of selfish escape and survivalism, at whatever level, are just one of these many destructive and corrupting manipulations. Yes, post-mortal heaven. But what should we do here and now? Bruce Charlton. Christian faith is, or should be, focused on resurrected eternal life in post-mortal heaven. So, not this moral life, not this earth and universe. But what should we do here and now? The answer could be, do what you evaluate as best, and start now. But, Don't expect to make a system from it. Do not try to create a formula for world saving, nor even for world improvement. Your answer as to what to do, now, the best answer you can diligently and honestly discover and devise, is something about which you cannot persuade others, therefore you should not try. You should not wait until after persuading enough others, and launching a movement before you do it. It is, nearly, all about your discernment, your insight, your actions in your life. And what happens to most people, or even the few people that surround you, is something you cannot control. And it is actually control of others that motivates most supposed world bettering and evangelism. Give up control fantasies, if you can. Work from love, not from systems, and where there is no love from you, there you can do no good. 2 reasons why evil is so difficult to explain: the primacy of perspective and motivation. Bruce Charlton. Considering that our life and world, and much of our social interaction, is underpinned and permeated with moral evaluations, we have a terrible problem about discussing the nature and presence of evil. The difficulty about discussing evil is so lasting and intractable that there are plenty of people, including plenty of rich, powerful, famous and influential people, who will deny the reality of evil, in many and various ways. But even those insightful and honest enough to admit that they regard evil as real, have a terrible problem with explaining themselves. At least, they seldom succeed in explaining the nature and presence of evil. There are multiple reasons, many psychological and some spiritual, for the difficulty of explaining evil. Here I am focusing on 2 important reasons: perspective and motivation. Both problems arise because people are trying to find a way of explaining the reality of evil, and they do this by seeking a way of generating an objective consensus about what is evil. In other words, they try to frame evil such that what is evil is defined in a way that everyone can agree upon, i.e. consensus, and they seek criteria for evil that are, in principle, externally detectable and measurable, i.e. objective. They want evil to be something like a scientific fact, as they imagine science actually to be. Or perhaps something more like an engineering principle, something that elicits general agreement among the competent, and that reliably works when properly comprehended and executed. Something pragmatically true. People therefore nearly always try to explain evil in terms of evil actions, and evil actions that are acknowledged to be evil by everybody, indifferent to the person's perspective. This immediately means that the examples of evil up for discussion are going to be second-hand and remote, often historical, and concerning other people, elsewhere. Things like a particular group killing done on the basis of an ethnic or religious identity. Such are what people usually try to understand and explain. But in real life we find that we never actually do eliminate the effect of perspective. This is seen in evaluating current events. We find that from one perspective, perhaps a great and historical evil has been, or is actively being perpetrated, yet from another perspective this is not so. What appears as an objective and massive evil is denied, explained away, or regarded as compelled. One perspective's great evil is seen by its perpetrators and defenders as merely a lesser and necessary evil, the sort of practical action that is needed to survive in this world. I conclude that perspective never can, in practice, be eliminated. To put it bluntly, evil people will have good reasons for performing their evil acts. Perspective changes everything. And this is one of the arguments used to argue, what nobody truly believes, that evil is relative and therefore not really real. There are philosophical, or theological, arguments by which an objective model of reality is posited, within which evil is objective, but these arguments are never universally accepted or believed. All philosophical arguments require assumptions, and these assumptions are not universal, so that philosophical analysis does not solve the difficulty of explaining evil, but merely leads to the difficulty being shifted to another arena. The other difficulty is that while evil is explained in terms of acts, or events, or phenomena, of a kind that can be defined, isolated and measured. For instance, murder is first assumed necessarily to be evil, then the discussion moves on to a definition of murder, the detections of particular murders, the number of people murdered. Yet the whole process is undercut by the fact that murder is an abstraction intended to cover a wide range of very specific events, and when it gets down to specifics we find that, in order to accord with innate and general morality, the action itself needs to be evaluated in terms of its motivation. In other words, the objective aspect of murder turns out to be underpinned by personal motivation which must be inferred. In short, when it comes to explaining evil, we cannot escape the importance of perceptive and motivation, and both of these are substantially subjective, inner states. This is one reason why so many modern people in leadership roles try to assert that evil is unreal, i.e. because they do not wish to acknowledge the primacy of subjective, inner states, when it comes to the most important aspects of life. Or else they claim to be able objectively to infer inner and subjective states, using objective criteria. Given the primacy of morality in so much of life, and that authority will therefore always justify itself in moral terms, even if that morality is an inversion of common sense or intuition, one can see the necessity of somehow excluding the necessity of perspective and motivation in explaining evil. The outcome of which is that evil is not, cannot be, satisfactorily explained, which is where we came in. Since morality is inescapable and permeates our world, it seems obviously important that the nature of evil, and its presence and degrees, be explainable, and that these explanations be understandable. The current state of incoherent confusion about evil is surely, and for reasons that I would suppose are obvious, an undesirable state of affairs. Therefore, I suggest that when we ourselves find it necessary to discuss or explain evil in this world, we start with an acknowledgement that, for such discussion to proceed with any chance of being useful, it requires achieving mutual clarity about perspective and motivation. Presumably, if the discussion is honest and sincere, an upfront and two-sided declaration of where we personally stand on these matters. In most instances, these will be found to differ, in which case there is no point in proceeding in the direction of arguing about whether such and such is evil. Instead, the discussion ought to go deeper, to consider the whys and hows of our assumed perspective, and our assumptions concerning inferred motivations. Romantic mass manipulation. Bruce Charlton. Romanticism is a fact of modern man, such a powerful factor in the makeup of modern man, that those who exclude or ignore the romantic in their ideology, whether that be Christian or secular right, or anything else, consign themselves to feeble motivation, feeble courage, and the inevitability of their own corruption by selfish or worldly pressures. Romanticism in public discourse has been, over a span of a couple of centuries and more, almost monopolized by the left, who have made idealism and hope this worldly, dishonest, and incoherent. The situation is that people cannot live, cannot avoid despondent despair, without hope, and their hopes are channeled into delusions that are manipulated for the agendas of the establishment. Our romanticism is deliberately stirred up and encouraged from all directions and in many manifestations, especially via the mass media, and in the arts and entertainments, evoked and amplified. Then redirected into channels that benefit the agendas of those with most influence, wealth and power. This is normal and routine. Some idealistic aspiration, some enchanted daydream, gets colonized, politicized, materialized, and looped back to feed into the system. So, revolution, the counterculture, radical dissent and the rest of that species of this worldly romanticism, all the famous and influential, mainstream or alternative personnel and communication/institutional manifestations, are just competing factions among the establishment, office politics among the rulers. We are all romantics, by nature, don't fight it, use it. Romanticism is non-optional, at least if we are to avoid futile passivity, and the ultimate challenge is to own our romanticism, make it fully spiritual not partial and material, and to locate our romantic ideals in a timespan that is eternal in both directions. Warning: proceed with caution. Joining a Christian church is joining the totalitarian system. Bruce Charlton. Someone who is on the side of God the Creator, and who desires to attain the salvation of Jesus Christ, must proceed with caution when it comes to joining any formal organization. This is because we inhabit a totalitarian system, meaning that all formal institutions in our society are connected by a multitude of bureaucratic linkages, as was evident in 2020. Both totalitarianism and bureaucracy are intrinsically evil, which means that all formal institutions, politics, government service, law, medicine, corporations, charities, mass media, police, military, science, the arts, teaching, etc. All of the social institutions are, and must be, overall aligned with the purposes of evil. This situation is a real and present danger, a spiritual hazard. The unwary shall be led astray. And the warning applies as much to religions, churches, and specifically Christian churches, as to all the other institutions, so that a Christian who joins a church is in spiritual danger, and needs to proceed with caution. This does not mean that a Christian ought to avoid all churches, far from it. For many people, a church is necessary, and for others a particular church, when available and accessible, is positively beneficial to sustaining faith. But it does mean that, just as a Christian chooses his church with discernment, he must not set aside that discernment after joining that church. In a totalitarian world, no institution should be trusted, because none are worthy of trust. Christian must not, therefore, be striving to serve and obey any actually existing church, nor even that particular subsection of a church which Christian has chosen from the contending factions. Service and obedience to any totalitarian aligned organization will lead the individual towards evil, later if not sooner. Instead, he ought to be ready and willing to continue evaluating all aspects of the church, including whatever the church teaches, instructs, or demands. And proceeding, to the best of his ability, on the basis of these evaluations. It is a matter not so much of every Christian taking responsibility for selecting and implementing his faith, everybody already does that, but of acknowledging the fact that he is responsible, like it, or like it not. After all, many people must work, therefore have a job, and will mostly work for an organization or several. Everyone will have multiple dealings with government and large corporations. Indeed, people must join all sorts of institutions. We must join the totalitarian system. Opting out of the system is not an option. You may try to ignore the matrix, but the matrix will not ignore you. So what's the special problem with a church? None, unless you forget that the church is a part of the system, and think of it as something qualitatively apart. Yes, I know about the spiritual church within the institutional church, and the SC is, of course, what you want, as a Christian. The trouble is that the church will try to insist upon the institution, while leaving the spiritual stuff as, well, nice but optional. Spiritual disobedience is tolerated, even encouraged. Plenty of bishops and archbishops who don't believe that Jesus was divine, or don't believe in Satan or hell, but institutional disobedience. That is what gets priests defrocked and laity excommunicated. Hell, where did it come from, where did it go? Bruce Charlton. I was reading a biography of Stevie Smith by Frances Faulding, and a chapter concerning her relationship to Christianity, by which was largely meant the Church of England. At one point it quoted a passage to the effect that the one thing SS found most repellent was the idea of hell. In particular, to summarize, Stevie rejected hell regarded as a place of eternal torment, to which people were sent by default, on the basis of divine judgment. In rejecting this idea of hell, as well in her response to this rejection, ceasing to be what she regarded as a Christian, I suppose Stevie Smith was representative of her era. Certainly I have often seen or heard the same kind of thing said by others. It seems that, in some broad sense, hell came in with Christianity around or after the time of Jesus, and disappeared with Christianity through the 19th and 20th centuries. And, at about the same time as hell was disappearing, people began finding the idea repellent, because those who rejected hell also assumed that hell was not true, assumed that the hell concept is, and always had been, false. And therefore the hell rejectors infer that the primary nature of the hell concept was as a psychological manipulation used to terrorize people into joining and obeying the Christian Church. In other words, the Stevie Smith-esque moral critique of hell already rejects the reality of hell. It already assumed that hell is not and never was real. The question I address about hell is, where did it come from, where did it go? What has apparently happened, is that the modern human mind has become unreceptive to the reality of hell. What once seemed real, possible, almost inevitable, has come to seem an obvious deception. A cruel, because manufactured, mass manipulation. To summarize, hell used to work very effectively as a mechanism of population control, but it does not work anymore. This historical change towards hell incredulity is usually interpreted sociologically, meaning in essence that the change in men's minds was caused by changes in society. If the sociological explanation is true, this would imply that if modern society was changed, then hell could again become an effective motivator, and this change would happen whether hell is regarded as a reality that is now being denied, or if hell is regarded as a not real tool of social control. But I believe that sociological change to restore hell could not and therefore would not happen. I suggest instead that hell first came, and then went, because of changes in human consciousness. In other words, I am saying that hell arose because men's minds became receptive to the idea, and this change led to sociological change, and then hell dwindled because men's minds changed further, and then society changed to reflect this. The idea is that hell is a product of a particular phase of mankind's consciousness, and that phase has now passed. On this view, because hell is primarily a product of man's consciousness, then it would not be possible to restore the ancient idea of hell. And if hell is a product of consciousness at a particular phase of development, then a modern-day religious society could not motivate people with such an idea of hell, even if it is true, and for the same reason, a tyranny could no longer effectively control society with the false but believed threat of hell. What was this phase of consciousness that was so receptive to hell? I would term it a semi-alienated state of partial group mind. My idea is that in ancient, pre-Christian, times, men were not alienated but were, mostly, immersed in their society, and actually lived as a part of the group mind. The after-death experience was then regarded in a groupish way. Whatever happened beyond death, happened to the members of the group. Men were not then afraid of becoming an existential outcast in the manner of hell. Hell emerged when men each began to separate their personal consciousness from the group mind, and hell was, I suggest, a consequence of this state of being semi-alienated. Man's hope was to retain the state of being in this group mind after death, but hell came from the terror that, after death, the group may choose to cast out the individual because of that individual's transgression of the group norms, and consign him to the eternal torment of being existentially alone. The sociological phenomenon of hell was therefore a consequence of men's innate angst concerning emergent alienation from the group mind, which is why men became receptive to the idea of hell. But in the development of human consciousness, men continued to detach from the group mind, until for recent generations men have ceased to experience the primacy of the group mind, to the point of being unaware of it, and even denying its reality. Modern men regard themselves as almost wholly alienated, and therefore tend spontaneously to regard death as an inevitable and universal annihilation. In the officially, and inwardly perceived, modern secular mainstream understanding of each man dwelling in a purposeless and meaningless universe, there can be no divine judgment. And the idea that mortal life-death might lead to a default inevitable state of being tormented cannot for a modern man be true, because for modern men, after death there is nothing. For modern Christians, with the alienated consciousness we share with other modern men, salvation and hell are alike consequences of personal choice in relation to the divine, not a judgment. And as this alienated consciousness continues to develop, these personal choices of post-mortal situation become more individual, bespoke, unique, and reciprocally less and less group-defined, less and less categorical in nature. Modern Christians now understand hell, insofar as they have thought about it seriously, more as a positive choice. Hell is a choice made by those who have decisively rejected, for whatever reason, the desirability and chance of resurrected eternal life in heaven. Hence, for the consciousness of modern Christians, hell is real but differently understood than 1 to 2,000 years ago. The modern concept of hell is nowadays negatively defined as everything but heaven. For modern consciousness, hell is therefore an open-ended variety of possibilities, and insofar as hell is for some individuals experienced as a situation of eternal torment, then this is what has been asked for, and from which they do not repent. Note, the title of this post references an amusing and enjoyable novelty song that my kids used to dance to, mainly from a We Just Dance compilation. Conquering Evil. William Wildblood. The scale of modern-day evil is extraordinary, but many people are insensitive to this evil because, being spiritually based, it is not obvious to the materialistically minded. The majority simply look away as long as they personally are not suffering. But that is becoming less easy to do, as one of the manifestations of modern evil is the destruction of Western countries, which has now reached the point at which no one other than a self-deceiver can ignore it. Why do people deceive themselves like this? Is it just too uncomfortable to face reality? When one looks around at how our countries are being deliberately dismantled, it's hard not to get angry. I won't go into all the ways this is happening. If you aren't aware of them by now, you have not been paying attention these past 30 years. Or else you have an ideological commitment to ignore them because of political sympathies that could well be based, when you dig down to motivations, on resentful egotism. Western countries, which means Western people, are being systematically taken apart, and this should make any right-minded person furious, chiefly with the people doing the destroying and only secondarily with those they use to do it, who, for the most part, are ignorant, albeit self-centered, pawns. However, let's take a step back. There has always been evil in the world, and one can assume there always will be. It is the nature of the world that this should be so. It comes in peaks and troughs, and we are certainly in a peak at the moment, but if we understand that we have come to the end of a civilizational cycle, then we can see that the present situation is almost inevitable. With that in mind, what should our attitude be? First of all, as believers in the principle that the real life is elsewhere, we should preserve a measure of detachment. This world is on fire, and that is nothing new. The fire is raging now, but it has never ceased to burn. We can use that fact as a sign that we should turn away from this world and look for our true home in a higher world. At the same time, we cannot just take a passive, laissez-faire attitude to the present situation, for if we are alive now and understand something of what is going on, we must respond in some way. Knowledge without action is incomplete. But what should this action be? When we recognize evil, we must do something about it. It is easy, or should be, see above, to see the evil in the world, but evil exists within ourselves too. Therefore, the point at which we should start is to set about conquering the evil within ourselves. You cannot fight evil with evil. If you try to defeat evil in the world from a point of spiritual unawareness, you will likely do more harm than good. Put your own house in order first. This doesn't mean wait until you are perfect before you do anything. If that were the case, you would never do anything. But make sure that what you do comes from a point of spiritual understanding rather than worldly rage. You may appear to be less effective, but you will be aligning yourself with the spiritual powers instead of their adversaries, who can easily co-opt behavior that has not submitted itself to a proper spiritual focus. There is a balance to be struck between, on the one hand, knowing we are living in the dying embers of a civilization and accepting that cannot be turned around, and, on the other, doing what one can to preserve as much as possible of the good, the beautiful and the true, perhaps only to act as seeds for future revival rather than to revive the present age, which may be impossible. The nature of the Kali Yuga is that it ends in collapse. However, that is only external. The real battle, as always, is for consciousness, and that is what we should be working to maintain, support, preserve, uplift and salvage. Can Christianity escape from the authority of history? Bruce Charlton. The question of history, that there is an objectively true, evidenced account of the past, of how things came to be the way they are now, is one that has been very strong since the subject of history began to emerge as a distinctive discipline, detached, supposedly, from religious, later ideological, justifications and dishonesties. But the idea that true history emerges from the evidence turns out to be as false as the analogous argument for the natural sciences. In both cases, coherence and proof is provided by theory, and theory must come prior to evidence. Because without a prior theory, how would anyone decide what, from infinite perceptions etc., counted as evidence, its relative value compared with other evidence, or what a piece or collection of evidence meant? In mainstream culture, this has left us with two false and incoherent alternatives. On the one hand, multiple rival blustering and categorical assertions that this is the truth about history, assertions that ignore the dependence on prior theory. And on the other side, the supposedly radical relativist subversion that states everything is ideology, so that objective truth has no meaning, so that truth cannot be known and is just a consequence of power, assertions that ignore their blatant self-subversion. For these folk, history is just a story made up by the winners, and the discipline of history something created to reach the conclusions they have already decided, and any other story can have equal validity. And that is pretty much how things stand. The traditionalist, orthodox, religious reactionary side wrongly assert that the evidence for their assertions is objective, and the radical, liberal, reforming side of religion asserts that their own take on the world is better than that of the conservatives, despite that they have previously asserted that better has no objective meaning and is merely a consequence of power. Usually, People pick a side because they can see no alternative, and in order to join a gang, and stoutly continue to ignore the fatal weakness, the non-objectivity of their own position, its dependence on theoretical assumptions, by relentlessly focusing on the fatal weakness and non-objectivity of their opponent's position. The choice that culture forces upon us is between truth is what I say and there is no truth, both based on circular and incoherent arguments. What should we do when faced with two false alternatives? Should we do what most people do when confronted by mainstream electoral politics, or rival sports teams located in your home city, just pick a side then support it fanatically, while demonizing the opposition? Is that really the best we can do when confronted by the most fundamental problems of our human existence? People need to recognize that the dilemma is one of our own creation, and rooted in an unexamined assumption that the truth about reality is and must be a public consensus. The false modern dilemma of choosing between two falsehoods arises from our own built-in assumption that truth is either a consensus located externally and communally and with nothing to do with me, my job being only to choose to submit to it or deny it. Or else truth is nothing but inside my head. Whatever my brain happens to be telling me at this instant. What we need is obvious enough. We need to understand how truth both depends on me and my assumptions and thinking, and truth also is about reality, about things, entities other than myself. I think the distinction we need is between things existing, and knowledge about them. We must assume, and indeed are born assuming, that other entities exist. Doubts about the existence of reality emerge later, and indeed are large distinctive to relatively modern times, the past few centuries. These doubts are reinforced by the impossibility of finding evidence that other entities exist outside of our own thoughts about them. Solipsism, the belief that nothing exists outside myself, cannot be refuted in its own terms, cannot be refuted by evidence. Solipsism is thus a pathology caused by the choice to deny what we innately know, a choice to explain everything by constructing and entering a circle of subjectivity. On the other side, the blustering assertions of the reality of reality are nearly always actually assertions about our knowledge of reality. For instance, religious people are not content to assume the innate understanding in the objective reality of God as another entity from me, but combine the innate with asserting the objectivity of their own claim for knowledge of God's many and complex attributes. They conflate the innately understood reality of God with knowledge of the theological God, thereby re-entering the false dilemma debate that undermines all such claims. After which the conservative religious will usually bluster and shout his knowledge assertions while pouring scorn on those who do not share them. While the radical liberal religious will usually adopt a passive-aggressive strategy of undermining the possibility of any objective and universal knowledge about reality, to distract from the fact he is making his own assertions concerning reality, and is assuming these assertions are more true than the conservatives. To loop back, how can we take account of history in such a situation, when we assume that there was a real history that led up to the present, but all our specific knowledge of that history is undermined by the subjective-objective distinction? When history has become impossible. Especially this is a problem, in that Christianity is located in history, and happened at a particular past time and place. When history has become impossible in the mainstream of public discourse, this must, and does, have a profoundly subversive effect on Christianity. Christians can neither depend on objective history nor can they allow history to be wholly personal and subjective. When it comes to history, there is the choice of two sides for the Christian, yet both sides are lethal to Christianity. The answer? Well, because the insoluble problem is located in the domain of public discourse, and the phenomenon of consensus, then the Christian cannot root his religion in public discourse. And cannot means cannot, because insofar as a Christian does root religion in public discourse, his religion will be subverted, as we see all around us. And public discourse includes all churches. My conclusion is that the historical religion of Christianity now cannot be rooted in churches, cannot derive from churches, cannot be what a church says. And that cannot means cannot. Notes. The blustering and aggressive tone characteristic of many trads is not universal, but the attempt to avoid it with an attitude of personal humility directed at the authority of the chosen church is undermined by the fact that the church has been personally chosen, as has the attitude adopted to that church. The much more proximate bribes and threats of, for example, mainstream political, bureaucratic and media institutions will easily overcome the scruples of a would-be humble trad Christian, by interpreting his stance of obedience as instead a personal choice, which indeed it is. The self-identified humbly obedient therefore gets depicted as an arrogantly individual willfully rejecting the consensus of decent people. The social psychological pressure from such a framing is typically way too much for a self-identified humble trad to resist, without ceasing to be humble. The choice to obey a chosen church rather than to obey the law or corporate rules, genuinely is ultimately a personal choice, no matter how humbly chosen. There is a strong and chronic and continuing tendency of Christians, as well as other religions and grouping, to assimilate into the core agenda of atheist materialist totalitarianism. And the direction of this tendency, although not the speed by which it operates, applies across the board, to Christians of all denominations and churches, to traditionalists as well as liberals. Liberal Christians have no compelling reason to resist the authority of the secular Western leadership class, and typically embrace all the major totalitarian strategies, since they explicitly share a core ideology. Traditionalists also converge with mainstream atheism over time, having the role of controlled opposition. This assimilation happens because they strive for socio-political institutional establishment in actual context of the system, and this project intrinsically entails working within system constraints, from system assumptions, and with system evidence/facts/procedures. When arguments conspire to deny individual lived experience. Francis Berger. Imagine someone who, as a child, suffered under an abusive, alcoholic father. Telling that person that he cannot apply his individual experience to all fathers or fatherhood in general may be logically coherent, but it essentially sidesteps the individual's terrible childhood growing up under a bad father. One bad father does not mean all fathers are bad. Nor does it mean that fatherhood itself is bad. True. All the same, none of that really acknowledges the badness of that one specific father under whom the individual in question suffered, to say nothing of that individual's experience. The same goes for the not as bad as spiel. Saying things like the church closures of 2020-21 were not as bad as the Black Death does not really address the church closures that occurred earlier in this decade. For one, it's a false comparison, i.e., the Black Death was not a top-down system fomented and enforced health crisis to which the church readily and willingly adhered. Aside from that, it once again sidesteps the matter of lived experience. Most Christians alive today experienced the church closures of 2020-21, while the Black Death is entirely a matter of history, i.e., piecing together what the case may have been back during that time by locating and gathering sources to determine what happened, which, once again, is not lived experience. The tragedy of human life. Akenfield. Again. Bruce Charlton. I am rereading Ronald Blythe's Akenfield again, this time as an audiobook, and am again finding it a deeply moving experience. This applies especially to the earliest section, that has the old farm workers and their wives speaking about the span of their lives, memories and experiences which go back to the end of the 1800s, but which especially focus on the early years of the 20th century. The two world wars loom large, but also the agricultural depression of the 1920s and 30s. The village is composite, and the people in the book are anonymized. Their raw words have been selected and arranged by the poetic pen of Blythe. It was published in 1968, and stories are from interviews in the preceding years. I first read this book when it was recently published and I was 14 or 15. It was recommended by my favorite history teacher, and it had a lasting effect on me. I was made starkly aware of the qualitative transformation in the comfort and convenience of ordinary rural people's lives over the middle decades of the 20th century. Listening again, I can see that my own reflections went beyond those of the author himself, who talked with the people and gave them each a voice and perspective, and I think they still do, but differently. I suspect that Blythe himself drew rather different conclusions from his own work than I get from it, then and now. 50 years ago, I saw the vast improvement in the security and abundance as having solved the age-long problem of material, or biblical, poverty reported by the older Akenfield residents, the chronic hunger, insufficient and worn clothes, wet and cold, severe overcrowding, the serious lack of time, drainage of energy, cultural impoverishment, and infrequent fun. My youthful conclusion from the contrasting interviews with younger people of the village, confirmed by my own experiences and observations, was that the recent abundance, the all but universal comfort and convenience, was being dissipated in the quest for ever more of the material goods that had been in such short supply. Instead of saying we have enough, people were saying we want even more. Instead, my idea was that we should be striving in the direction of creative achievement, arts, and sciences, and building a world with wholesome, folkish, communal activities such as singing and dancing and crafts. I ignored the book's story of the decline of religion, by which Blythe mainly means serious and frequent church or chapel participation, because at that time religions seemed obviously untrue, and the descriptions of the olden days life of church and chapel were without any appeal to my young self. Nowadays, I am more intrigued by the way that people regard their lives, taken as a whole, what they seem to think their lives were about. For many of the villagers, life seems to have been about some aspect of the village. Even the religious ones seem to think of it in terms of communally recognized activities. I see this now, with a different generation of the oldest, and in my own, now old, generation, a tendency to look back and seek, bring forward, various achievements, usually from earlier life, or recently, or perhaps those of family, and regard these as justification. The younger or fitter elderly seem nowadays to be justifying their lives in terms of continuing activities, the I am busier than ever since I retired sort of thing. In Blythe's 1979 book about old age, The View in Winter, based on interviews with the elderly, a book which I did not much like, he concluded similarly that the things to strive for in old age was continued activity and engagement for as long as could be managed. Blythe himself lived to the age of 100 and was writing, and writing well, into his 90s, but, as so often happens nowadays, he was apparently afflicted with dementia for the last decade plus, and disengaged from reality. He continued living in his own house and alone, he never married, but with a great deal of essential outside help, as he had advocated as best for the elderly several decades earlier. Yet I find this kind of advice about old age, staying active and engaged, living in one's own home etc., to be better than most alternatives, but merely a temporary and very partial palliative, when it comes to understanding and justifying what my life is about. Such reflections always lead to the solid insight that human life, as such, is tragic. If life is about what happens during life, it cannot help but be sad, one way or another. Because real or supposed achievements in the past, or by the now deceased, do not really mean anything of themselves, no matter how often or vehemently we may repeat or pretend they do. But some things that happen in our lives go much deeper than others, and are experienced as much better. Nostalgia for being active, working hard, social engagement, or for the fun of various kinds, including the obvious, are simply not very profound, no matter how we spin it with words, pictures, or stories. Or, if such things genuinely are regarded as the most profound experiences of our lives, as so often seems to be the case, by self-report, then that does seem ineradicably, and finally, tragic. Seeking spiritual contacts, the advantages of deceased persons over the still living. Bruce Charlton. As a spiritual goal and method, seeking spiritual contacts with individual people is the best strategy, and superior to the use of abstract models. The difference is that the division of reality into persons, into beings, is the primary division of reality. Reality actually is divided into beings, whereas any other scheme of analysis, e.g. by symbolism, is, ultimately, an artificial and simplified scheme, imposed upon real reality. Much of this mortal life is about our relationships with the people familiarly related to us, and typically around us in the material environment, and especially those whom we love. That is, with material contacts, among people whom we know physically. But our relationship with the wider world and universe, ideally includes spiritual contacts, by which I mean relationships with those whom we know spiritually rather than physically. Of course, there is a much wider range of possible spiritual contacts than physically present people. Spiritual contacts can be with people who are still alive, in this mortal life, and they can also be with those who are deceased, and especially those who have died and resurrected to eternal life. It might be supposed that material relationships are always the best, and spiritual relationships are secondary or even optional. This ranking is probably usually true. Our family, spouse, best friends are usually the most significant relationships. But physical relationships are not the most important for everybody, and they are not necessarily most important at all phases and stages of a human's life. Even for those who are most deeply engaged by physical relationships, a better, fuller, more creative and integrative life may be possible if there are important spiritual as well as physical relationships. In my own life, the most profound and enduring relationships have often been spiritual in nature. Examples include J.R.R. Tolkien, the first such, Glenn Gould, and William Arkell. What is interesting is that these people were alive when I first knew of them, and I even met Arkell face to face, once, very briefly. He lived in the same village as me. But in all cases, the spiritual relationships became much more important after the person had died, and I think this may be significant. To explain, I had a more powerful sense of spiritual contact with these people after they had died, than while they were alive. I think it possible that spiritual contacts may be stronger and more significant than physical relationships, and spiritual relationships may potentially be stronger with the deceased than with the still living. One plausible reason, plausible to me, is that the resurrected dead are wholly good, wholly loving beings in a way that is impossible during mortal life. Therefore the relationship has potential to be wholly beneficial to us, insofar as we ourselves are able to respond to this goodness, which is inevitably only partly. Another reason, reciprocally related to this, is that the still living are often more or less dominated by this world. They may be dominated, at any particular moment, by the corrupt, selfish, misguided, evil, or otherwise negative aspects of their natures. Such factors may make spiritual contact with the living both more difficult to achieve, and less beneficial, less good, if it does happen. Furthermore, living mortals often, to a greater or lesser degree, close their minds to spiritual contact, whether consciously, compulsively, or unconsciously, such that there can be little or no spiritual contact with them. This mind closing may be for good reasons as well as bad ones, for example a need to conserve energy and attention for what seem like, and may be, important spiritual tasks, or to exclude potential spiritual subversions and other attacks. Nonetheless, it seems to be a fact, in my experience, that I am usually unable to feel any sense of spiritual contact with even those among the living whose works, for example writings, have benefited me greatly, and therefore for whom I sometimes feel drawn to establish some kind of spiritual contact. It just doesn't happen. However, many or most of all those who have died are not resurrected heaven dwellers, and some are evil spirits or one sort or another. It is possible, indeed perhaps easier, to achieve spiritual contact with these than with the resurrected, and such contacts will most likely be harmful to the still living. In my opinion, this especially applies when spiritual contact is being sought for present and selfish gain, to impose one's will upon the world. This motive surely tends to attract the more mischievous, pitiful, and even demonic type of discarnate spirits, those spirits who aim to manipulate and exploit the still living for their own benefit. It also may well apply when spirit contact is being sought for less obviously selfish motives, such as to be taught knowledge or provided with life guidance. The kind of discarnate spirits who are likely to respond to a demand for knowledge include those spirits who are foolishly conceited about their own knowledge and capabilities, and seek disciples. Those among the living who seek life guidance from the dead, will presumably attract discarnate spirits who delusionally regard themselves as experts in what is best for other people. Spiritually analogous to the many professional counselors, life coaches, influencers, psychoanalysts, and psychotherapists in this mortal world, each convinced by his or her own superior wisdom and expertise. I conclude that when it comes to developing profound and beneficial spiritual contacts, dead people are, usually, superior to the still living. And that the main motive for such contacts should be a kind of personal love, or the sense that real and mutual friendship may be possible. After all, the truest physical friends in our mortal life are not those from whom we hope to get the most benefit, nor even those with whom we set up some kind of a mutually beneficial exchange. The best physical friends are those with whom we feel an affinity, and for whom we have lasting affection, and when this feeling is mutual. When we seek spiritual contacts, much the same applies as to mortal physical life. Initially we feel drawn to the person, often for no known reason, but spontaneously, from the heart. We feel that he or she is perhaps the kind of person with whom we may have a friendship. So we strike up an acquaintance, and begin interaction. Friendship, whether physical or spiritual, may, or may not, develop as each discovers more about the other, and the friendship may develop to varying degrees and depths. Not every true friend is also a best friend. But there can be no one-sided compulsion, because all real friendship is mutual and, at root, exists for its own sake, for mutual joy. The benefits we get from true friendship flow from its love, and the joy and creative stimulus that brings. Or other kinds of being. Let's use the A.K.A. ring to save and fortify Christianity. Francis Berger. Many Christians cannot seem to wrap their heads around the harmful and destructive, to say nothing of utterly useless, Boromir strategy, as outlined by Dr. Charlton via Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings. The following is but an example of this tired old snare in which Christians continue to get entangled, despite everything. Here A serves as a substitute for the ring, bold added.
Artificial intelligence has unsettled the Christian imagination, and for good reason. It speaks, imitates, flatters, instructs, and enters the vulnerable places where attention, desire, memory, and loneliness are formed. Retreat may look like wisdom, but absence also teaches. In this episode, we examine why Christians cannot answer the age of AI with fear, nostalgia, or holy incompetence. Technology must be placed beneath Christ, governed by discipline, and ordered toward mission. Drawing from Genesis, the Great Commission, the theology of subcreation, and the ancient disciplines of ascesis and nepsis, this episode argues for a sober Christian competence in the digital city. The machine cannot love God, absolve sins, or shepherd souls. Yet when ruled by prayer, beauty, and human judgment, it can become a servant of truth, mercy, teaching, and wonder. The throne belongs to Christ. The tool belongs beneath the throne.
Yes. Let's harness and use an inherently evil technology, evil in its motivation, design, purposes, and objectives, as a servant of truth, mercy, teaching, and wonder. You know, the same way Boromir wanted to use the ring to save Gondor. Once Christians have mastered the AI ring, they can use it to build an ark and guilds and communities and churches. I mean, it's not like we can really avoid it or anything, so we may as well use it for good. Besides, AI is not really inherently evil, right?
The AI revolution is the modern flood. That does not mean AI is evil in itself. Rain is not evil. Water gives life, cleanses the ground, fills the river, and feeds the field. Then it rises too high, and the same water that nourished the garden carries away the house. AI will reward people who know what they are for. It will punish those who wait to be assigned a purpose. That is why Christian order matters. The person formed by worship, family, work, craft, and duty can use new tools without becoming their servant. The person formed by appetite will be led by the nose through a palace of mirrors. Christians must stop treating AI as a debate topic and start treating it as weather. Learn the tools. Teach the children. Strengthen the household. Rebuild the parish. Form guilds. Protect real art. Restore feast days. Practice hospitality. Train attention. Study scripture. Recover craft. Build local bonds strong enough to hold when the national mood begins chewing furniture again. Christians should stop treating AI as a debate topic and begin treating it as rain. The task is not panic, purity theater, or retreat into technological nostalgia. Noah did not reject the flood. He built the ark. In the same way, Christians must build durable forms of life capable of carrying human dignity through upheaval, ordered households, embodied parishes, skilled guilds, sacred time, real craft, and disciplined attention.
Sure, we could do all that, I suppose, but do you really think any of it will work? Be honest now. Not just about the chances of such an ark staying afloat, but your own motivations for wanting one built. Or, we could begin to see this whole AI thing and using evil to do good thing from another angle. Quote. Now, many Christians have assimilated and committed to the idea that Christianity is essentially a group, communal activity, that must be pursued via an intermediary and material, this worldly social system, i.e. their favored church or denomination, so they are self-painted into an ever-shrinking corner from which they can only imagine, or will only entertain the possibility, of the same old form of Boromir strategic escape, no matter how often this has failed, no matter how counterproductive is the attempt in practice. Life is trying to teach us that retaking culture, taking over the system, or any version of the Boromir strategy, is not what we should be attempting, because we are spiritual beings with a direct line to God and direct guidance from the Holy Ghost. And this decision has been made easy for us, by the repeatedly proved fact that church-centered, institution-centered, collective strategies will not work, anyway, so it ought to be facile for us to abandon them. Of course, if one is indeed painted into this worldly corner, then this sounds like a counsel of despair. But if we are instead prepared to learn from the divine teachings of this world, we can be completely hopeful that pursuing the strategy which God has laid out for us will be far more successful, when success is defined correctly, i.e. spiritually, than the same old useless delusions. Indeed, we can be utterly confident that, in the long term and where it matters, we certainly will be successful, so we ought to feel joy, not despair. In other words, the reaction of despair is a product of self-blinding and a delusion. But joy is a consequence of that hope which derives from faith in God the Creator, our Heavenly Father, and we His children.